You remember calling a friend and hearing a parent answer. You remember leaving the house without a device tracking every message, map, and update. And you remember the strange electronic screech that meant the internet was coming alive. If those memories feel normal rather than ancient, this video may be about you. There is a popular name for people who grew up around the border between Generation X and Millennials, Xennials. It is not a scientific diagnosis or a perfectly agreed birth year box. It is an informal label for a cusp group whose formative years often stretched across one enormous cultural change. Their childhood could be mostly analog, while their adulthood became unmistakably digital. That transition is the real story here. Not whether you owned one particular toy or watched one particular show, but whether you remember ordinary life before constant connectivity and then learned the new rules as they arrived. Sign 1. Offline was your default state. You did not need to decide to disconnect because there was often nothing to disconnect from. Boredom could mean staring out a window, wandering outside, drawing, reading, riding somewhere, or simply waiting for another person to become available. That does not mean childhood was automatically calmer, healthier, or better. Families, neighborhoods, personalities, and circumstances varied enormously. The important difference is simpler. Digital interruption was not yet built into every quiet moment. Much of everyday attention happened in an environment with fewer channels competing for it. And because offline life was ordinary, going online felt like an event. A home computer could be shared by the whole family. Internet access might occupy the phone line. You connected, did something, and disconnected. The internet felt less like the atmosphere around life and more like a destination you visited. Sign 2. Making plans meant committing to the plan. You called someone, agreed on a place and time, and then actually left. Once everybody was out, there might be no group chat to renegotiate the details every 5 minutes. Sometimes you waited, sometimes someone was late, sometimes the plan simply failed. That uncertainty created a very different communication rhythm. Being temporarily unavailable was not automatically suspicious, rude, or alarming. People could disappear into school, work, errands, a bike ride, a movie, or an afternoon with friends and reappear later with a story instead of a live stream of updates. Again, that was not universally better. Being unreachable could be inconvenient, isolating, or unsafe. But if you remember a time when constant access to other people was not assumed, you have personally experienced a social expectation that has become much less common in the smartphone era. Sign 3. You remember the internet arriving. For younger generations, internet access may feel less like an invention than electricity, simply part of the environment. Xennials often remember the transition itself. Computer rooms, dial-up connections, printed directions, encyclopedias, and the growing realization that more and more answers were moving onto a screen. That timing matters more than nostalgia for a modem noise. In 2000, only about half of American adults were using the internet, and home broadband was still rare. Through the 2000s, high-speed access expanded rapidly. Xennials were already children, teenagers, or young adults while that transformation accelerated. So they had to build two sets of instincts. One for a world where information could be scarce, slow, local, or physically stored. Another for a world where answers became searchable in seconds. Knowing both systems does not make someone wiser. It simply gives them memories from both sides. Sign 4. You watched entire media habits become obsolete. Music might have moved from cassettes to CDs, then files, then streaming. Movies moved from tapes to discs to digital libraries. Television went from scheduled programming to on-demand viewing. Each shift quietly changed what waiting, choosing, collecting, and replaying meant. Physical media also gave entertainment friction. You had what you owned, what a friend lent you, what the shop had, or what happened to be broadcasting. Limited choice could be frustrating, but it also meant many people encountered the same cultural moments at roughly the same time. Then abundance arrived. Suddenly the problem was not only getting access, it was deciding what deserved attention. Xennials did not invent that shift, and they were not the only people to experience it. But many lived through enough stages to remember when each new level of convenience still felt genuinely new. Sign 5. Much of your early identity formed before social media became the stage for adolescence. Childhood embarrassment could still disappear into memory instead of being permanently photographed, posted, searched, and resurfaced. Your awkward phases existed, but many of them were witnessed mainly by the people who were actually there. Social networking then expanded dramatically during Xennials' young adult years. Pew found that only a small share of American adults used social networking sites in 2005, before usage climbed sharply over the following decade. Many Xennials therefore met social media after a substantial part of childhood had already happened offline. That does not prove their identities are healthier or more authentic. It does create an interesting contrast. They learned who they were in one social environment, then had to learn how to present that self in another. Profiles, status updates, digital photos, searchable histories, and eventually feeds that never really ended. Sign 6. You became digitally fluent by adapting. You may have learned keyboard shortcuts on a desktop, burned CDs, used instant messaging, carried a basic mobile phone, discovered social platforms, upgraded to a smartphone, and eventually handled cloud accounts and streaming subscriptions, all without thinking of these as one continuous technological education. This is where the Xennial stereotype becomes more useful as a story than as a hard demographic rule. The defining feeling is not "I hate technology" or "I was born digital." It is "I remember learning technology in layers, and every few years the layer underneath seemed to change again." By 2011, only about a third of American adults owned a smartphone. By 2015, that had risen to more than 2/3. For many Xennials, smartphones therefore became dominant after childhood and adolescence, not before them. The always connected device arrived as an adult habit rather than a nursery room background condition. Sign 7. You remember being genuinely unreachable. Not because your battery died, not because you switched on Do Not Disturb. You could simply leave. There were no blue ticks, no location sharing, no expectation that a person carrying a phone should be able to answer almost immediately. That memory can make today's communication feel miraculous and exhausting at the same time. Instant contact solves real problems. Maps prevent people from getting lost. Families can coordinate. Help can be summoned quickly, but convenience also changes expectations, and expectations can turn yesterday's luxury into today's social obligation. This is where nostalgia needs a correction. Fewer notifications did not guarantee better attention. Less supervision did not guarantee resilience. An analog childhood could include loneliness, bullying, boredom, family stress, or danger, just as a digital childhood can include creativity, community, knowledge, and support. Sign 8. Neither Gen X nor Millennial stereotypes quite fit. Maybe the cultural references from older Gen X feel slightly too early, while jokes about millennials growing up online feel slightly too late. That mismatch is exactly why a cusp label can feel emotionally satisfying even when its boundaries are fuzzy. Generational categories are tools, not laws of personality. Pew uses 1965 through 1980 for Gen X and 1981 through 1996 for millennials, while also stressing that generational cutoffs are not an exact science. Merriam-Webster describes Xennials more loosely as people born in the late 1970s through early to mid-1980s. So the label works best as a description of overlapping formative experiences, not a test you pass with a birth certificate. Someone can relate strongly without matching every memory, while another person born in the supposed range may have grown up with completely different technology, geography, income, family rules, or culture. Sign 9 is the one underneath all the others. You remember the handover. You remember when analog systems still organized ordinary life, and you remember watching digital systems replace them. Not overnight, but one habit at a time. Communication, music, directions, photographs, shopping, work, entertainment, friendship, and eventually identity. That may be why the Xennial idea resonates. It describes a group with memories of two operating systems for everyday life. One was slower, more physical, and less connected. The other became searchable, portable, personalized, and increasingly continuous. Neither world was simply better. They asked different things from the people living inside them. So if your childhood was analog and your adulthood became digital, the most revealing sign may not be a cassette, a landline, or a dial-up modem. It is the feeling of having watched normal life change its rules in real time. How many of these 9 signs felt uncomfortably specific to you?